$10,000 for a house in Japan. It is a real, findable price, not a headline exaggeration, and by the end of this video you will know the honest total that number actually turns into. Not a vague warning to budget more. An actual, itemized answer, cost by cost, in the order the bills actually arrive. Here is the twist almost nobody explains up front. Once the purchase price gets this low, it stops being the number that matters. Every other cost on this list is now bigger than the house itself, which means the real price of a $10,000 home has almost nothing to do with the $10,000. Prices this low exist for an ordinary, well-documented reason. Japan's housing stock includes millions of vacant homes, concentrated in rural areas where population has been falling for decades, and a wooden building is treated as worth close to nothing for tax purposes after about 22 years. Strip the building's value to zero, and what is left is cheap rural land with a structure still standing on it. That is not a scam or a trick listing. It is simply what the math looks like once demographics and depreciation both point the same direction for long enough. Municipal Akiya banks, the public listing sites local governments run specifically to move these properties, are full of prices in this range, often attached to real, land included, structurally intact houses rather than ruins. The $10,000 price tag is honest. It is just the smallest number in the entire transaction. Start stacking costs the moment you agree to buy. Registration and license tax runs roughly 2% of the property's assessed value. Real estate acquisition tax adds another 3 to 4%. A judicial scrivener, the specialist who legally registers the transfer of ownership, typically charges 100 to 300,000 yen. An agent commission, where one is involved, adds close to 3% more. Added up and closing costs alone commonly run 6 to 10% of a normal transaction. Except on a $10,000 house, that percentage-based math barely applies, because several of these fees have practical minimums that do not shrink just because the purchase price did. A buyer from overseas adds a notarized signature affidavit in place of a Japanese personal seal, and, from April 2026, a mandatory post-purchase filing with the Bank of Japan within 20 days. None of this is optional, and almost none of it appears anywhere on the listing page. Before any of that paperwork matters, you need to know what is inside the walls. A basic professional inspection costs roughly 50 to 70,000 yen, a detailed one over 100,000, and it is the cheapest, highest value line item on this entire list because it turns hidden problems into known numbers. Most houses in this price range predate Japan's 1981 seismic standard, sometimes the 2000 revision too, so a real structural assessment is not optional caution. Then comes the number that actually decides everything: renovation. Like cosmetic work, paint, tatami, small repairs, can run a few $1,000s. A moderate renovation, touching the kitchen and bathroom, new flooring, and small structural fixes, tends to land between $14,000 and $35,000. A genuine structural and seismic renovation, addressing plumbing, wiring, insulation, and a compliant roof, regularly lands between $30,000 and $65,000, sometimes more depending on how badly the building was neglected. Bathrooms in particular are a near-universal first project on a house this age, since waterproofing and fixtures rarely survive decades of neglect intact. Notice what just happened to the $10,000. It has already been lapped, several times over, by a single line item that has nothing to do with the purchase price at all. Ownership itself keeps billing you, even before you have finished paying for the last two layers. Property tax is owed on a house whether it is occupied, empty, or mid-renovation, so a slow rebuild is also a slowly ticking cost. There is one piece of genuinely good news buried in the tax code, though. Land with a habitable structure on it keeps a steep property tax discount, up to roughly 83% versus vacant land. So as long as the building stays standing during a renovation, the tax bill stays low too. And the subsidy system, while it will not erase these costs, can meaningfully soften them. Renovation grants commonly cover 30 to 50% of eligible work, occasionally far more, depending on the municipality, stacked from national, prefectural, and local programs at once. The honest picture is not endless costs with no relief. It is real costs, with real, checkable relief available if you do the paperwork before you assume you cannot afford it. Add the layers together, honestly. $10,000 for the house. A few hundred to a couple thousand more in closing costs and paperwork. $100 to $700 for the inspection that protects everything after it. $30,000 to $65,000, commonly, to make an aging structure genuinely livable and safe. Ongoing property tax for as long as you own it, offset partially by subsidies if you claim them. The honest total, for a real renovation rather than a cosmetic patch, typically lands somewhere between $40,000 and $80,000, 4 to 8 times the advertised price, before subsidies are applied. That is not a reason to avoid a $10,000 house. It is the reason to stop calling it a $10,000 house at all. Buyers who plan for that real number from day one end up with a genuinely cheap home in Japan. Buyers who plan for the listing price end up surprised at every single step described here. In order, one bill at a time. The number on the listing was never the price. It was the deposit on finding out what the real one is. If this made Japan's empty house market a little clearer, subscribe to Akiya Handbook, the channel that explains how Japan's cheap houses actually work, honestly, and without selling you anything. There is also a free guide waiting in the description, the Akiya Buyer's Starter Guide, how to buy a cheap house in Japan without getting burned. 11 chapters on the truth about so-called free houses, the hidden costs, and who should not buy. No hype, and completely free. The link is below. Thanks for watching.